So we've read a book. Do you remember what the title is?
Your next 24 hours.
Your next 24 hours. It was given to us from Convoy of Hope, and that's where we're pulling all of these stories from. We're going to share with you several stories of acts of kindness to inspire you. And Hal Donaldson wrote this book for that purpose, to inspire us to do acts of kindness. And so I wanted to mention it last week, too. We kind of had another different service. I had a message prepared. Lord had different ideas, but that's all good. But basically, it was a bunch of verses that show us that the Bible does, and God does command us to be kind. We've got to be kind to one another. So I wanted you to look at this last 3 weeks, all these 3 weeks as a whole series is one part. I couldn't have done it all in one Sunday, where the first week we talked about kindness and defined kindness and how it was slightly different than love. And last week we talked about the biblical precedents, like I said. And then this week is the inspiration to kind of get you over the hump and to say, man, I can do this as well. My story may not be written down on pages in a book, but I can do some of these things. And so really as a three-parter, you get the whole package. But I wanted to start with the introduction of the book. Hal Donaldson wrote his story about how acts of kindness changed his life. I don't know if you knew, I'm kind of weird, and I'll share this because I want to share my life and who I am. And some of you might know that this, really sounds like me. In the 90s, when I was a teenager, I acquired a lot of CDs, and I liked music. It was mostly Christian. I only had very few secular CDs, but that's another sermon. All right, so the weird part about me, though, is that I would take the CD sleeves and read the books. I'd read what the lyrics are. I would read who made the music, not just who's in the band and everything, but who produced it as well. Like, how lame is that, right? That's pretty nerdy. But I wanted to know, and I started seeing that, like, the person who mixed the sound or produced this album also did this album too. So it's kind of that the phrase "knowledge is power." Like, I really realized that at an early age. That I just wanted the knowledge of who's doing all these things, and so Pentecostal Evangel rolls around, also in the 90s. How many of you remember that? The weekly publication that you'd find in AG churches all across the country. The editor for that magazine was Hal Donaldson. So that's how I first knew Hal Donaldson. He was editing, and I'd always read the note letter from the editor. And so this was very interesting when I started to read this. And so here's his story. It was the worst 24 hours of my life, not the long line at Starbucks or I had a bad hair day. No, this was from a real-life horror movie kind of day. It changed his life forever. He says, August 25th, 1969 was the date, and a persuasive knock catapulted my two brothers and me and our babysitter out the door, so he's young. We were greeted by two uniformed police officers who had come to deliver a message that our parents had been hit in an automobile accident by a drunk driver. My dad had died, and Mom was fighting for her life in the hospital. Instantly, pain and fear converged into a typhoon of tears. My 5-year-old sister, Susan, fell into my babysitter's arms and just cried, "I want Mommy and Daddy," as you can imagine. And like a flash mob, friends and family neighbors gathered to the front yard, and one of the police officers stood up on the porch and said, "Is there any friends or family members that can take these children here for the night? Otherwise, if there's no one that will volunteer, we'll take them downtown to the station." But there was a young couple named Bill and Luvada Davis who volunteered. But the one-night sleepover turned into months, a lot longer than they had imagined. While Mom had recovered from fractures and internal injuries, we lived with the Davises and their children in a single-wide trailer. There were not enough beds to accommodate 10 people, so we took turns sleeping on the floor. The Davises sacrificed their privacy and drained their savings account so that 4 children could have a place to live. Without complaint, Luvada spent her days cooking, cleaning, and folding laundry, while Bill worked extra hours at the rock quarry so that he could feed his small army. Slowly, our mother regained her health and learned to walk again. She took a job as a mail clerk, which enabled us to eventually move into a place of our own. But unfortunately, our dad didn't have life insurance, and neither did the man who hit them. So we learned firsthand the shame of poverty. We lived on food stamps, he says. We endured dreadful, cheap haircuts and arrived at school with holes in our shoes. Occasionally, bitterness threatened to rear its ugly head, but the Davises were always nearby, offering a helping hand and parental advice. They said, don't allow the tragedy of your childhood to become a lifelong excuse. Bill said, because where you start in life doesn't have to dictate where you end. I love that. It's powerful. I'm going to say it again. Where you start in life does not dictate where you will end. In time, my resentment over empty cupboards and my 37-year-old father's senseless death began to subside. I turned my attention to escaping the clutches of poverty. Eventually, I graduated from college and entered the workforce, determined to leave my disadvantaged childhood behind. I was earning money, raising a family, and traveling the world became my priority. I never forgot the Davises' lessons on selflessness and kindness, though. I was simply preoccupied with a quest for success. I told myself, someday I'll give back and I'll help the less fortunate, but my career has to come first. Fortunately, I wasn't in complete control of my destiny. In my travels, I came face to face with people who were suffering and in need. For example, an orphan boy without shoes, a homeless mother clutching her lifeless child, a Vietnam War vet who had lost his legs, an unemployed man holding a "will work for food" sign, and so much more. I could no longer ignore the struggles or escape the guilt of sitting on my hands while the world suffered. I knew climbing the socioeconomic ladder wasn't the path to true happiness and a meaningful life anyway, because the Davises were right. Fulfillment doesn't come from exceeding others, it comes from elevating others. Man, I want to know these Davis people. I'll say that again. True happiness and a meaningful life, or fulfillment, here it is. Fulfillment doesn't come from exceeding others, it comes from elevating others. So one day in 1994, I made a decision, Hal says, that would change the course of my life. It began with a couple of simple questions. What if a person was led by kindness and took his eyes off of himself and focused on the needs of others? And what difference would that really make? I wasn't trying to walk the red carpet to sainthood. I was just grabbing my backpack and setting out to explore whether what the Bible said was true from Proverbs 21:21. Whoever goes hunting for what is right and kind finds life itself. The impact of my decision was immediate. Like a magnet, kindness was pulling me towards spiritual transformation. With each passing day, selflessness became more satisfying, and selfishness became more distasteful. I was far from perfect, but I found myself searching for ways to serve others and to offer help and encouragement. Along with my two brothers and several friends, we began loading pickup trucks and U-Haul trailers with groceries and supplies and just distributed them to poor working families in California. We didn't know it then, but that was the first step towards Convoy of Hope, which is now a global humanitarian relief organization that has served more than 80 million people. My decision was inspired by the Davises' decision. They could have said, oh, we don't have enough money to rescue 4 kids. We don't have enough space in our home to house them. They could have just shed a tear and simply walked away. But instead, they moved beyond excuses and pity to action. They made our tragedy their own and hitched their happiness to ours. One decision can change the course of your life and the lives of others.
It just reminds me so much of something that Rob has said to me since I met him 20 years ago, and that is that love gets involved. It doesn't just look at a situation and then go on with its own life. Love gets involved. Another story this morning is of a woman from Sacramento, California, who was willing to give a kidney for a friend. This is a pretty impressive woman as far as I'm concerned, because I have not yet to date given a kidney for a friend. Zuli is her name, Zuli Broussard. She went as far as being screened as a possible donor. Then the surgeons decided that she was not a good match for her friend. So she, instead of accepting a free pass of keeping her kidneys, said, well, I was ready to do it, so let me just donate it to someone else, to a complete stranger. She informed her hospital that day that she was willing to give her good kidney to a total stranger. Zuli's heroic decision is an inspiration, not just to us at Algona Faith this morning, but actually to 5 other folks who took her lead and decided to donate their kidneys as well. That weekend, within 48 hours, 6 life-giving donations took place. Her selflessness saved 6 lives, but touched how many more? You and I this morning are touched by her selflessness, and we've never even met her. It's one thing to be willing to give a kidney to a family member or to a favorite friend. It's a whole other thing to be willing to suffer through a kidney surgery for a complete stranger and then set in motion a chain reaction that would touch many, many people. When they asked Zuli why, she said she was willing to face the major risk of surgery because she felt compassion for the people who endured dialysis multiple times a day, sometimes for years on end. I thought about that, and I wondered, how did Zuli know what it was like to face dialysis multiple times a week, week after week, year on end? She was the kind of friend who spent time with her friend who was in kidney failure. She went with her to dialysis treatment, and she didn't sit there on her phone or with a magazine trying not to make eye contact with the other people in the room. She sat there and she suffered alongside them. She felt their pain. She was moved by what she saw, and she took action. That word compassion means to suffer with. Zuli had been in that dialysis clinic and was moved by what she saw to a point that she was willing to offer her own life in pain to relieve their pain. We see stuff every day if we take our eyes off our phone or our magazine or our own life. We'll see stuff. And we should be moved. We can hear people's stories and witness their hardships. We can do something about it. We may not be able to do something huge, but something small is at least a place to start.
That's good, and I liked the chain reaction thought of that too. We've been, in bigger cities where there's Starbucks, and it seems to happen that when you pay for the car behind you, it starts a chain reaction, and that the person is ready to pay for their own order, and they're like, well, I'll just pay for the person behind me. And and the Starbucks baristas are like, well, here we go again. We've come across it where we've driven up, intended to pay for it's already been paid for. So it's the chain reaction, you just never know. Well, I want to take a second and talk about creativity and resourcefulness. There are often powerful expressions of kindness. Sometimes we just need to be a little creative with our resources. Children in Africa receive nutritious food and clean drinking water because somebody just had a new idea. Drug addicts in New York City are rehabilitated because someone tried a fresh approach. Children at a local elementary school have new computers because someone launched a fundraiser. So when you begin thinking creatively about what you can do to meet a need or to gather assets, to combine resources, you'll be surprised at what you can accomplish when you look and think outside the box. So 3 short stories. I won't be long. We're supposed to be back and forth, but to illustrate this point of creativity. In Michigan, a man was asked what he could do to help a young, unemployed stranger. Older man, younger man were talking, and the younger man admitted he was having a hard time keeping food on the table to feed his family. This older man was in his early 60s. He wasn't quite ready to retire, but he said, I'm going to take an early retirement so that this younger man can have my job. It's creative thinking. A teenager in Kentucky came up to a stranded motorist who had locked his key and cell phone in the car. The teenager was riding a bike, and so when he came up to him, he asked what was wrong. The man explained, and he said, we only have one car in our family, and my wife is at home 7 miles away with the key. So the teenager pulled his phone out and said, call your wife, give me directions to your house, Tell her I'm coming to get the key." And the man was shocked. That's 14-mile bike ride round trip. And the kid just smiled and said, "Well, I need the exercise anyway." In Dallas, there was a woman who was in a convenience store. And there was an ice storm approaching. And if you know that part of the country, as the overstreets do, when there's like threat of an ice storm, it may even blow over and not be much, but people freak out because they don't know how to drive in that kind of thing. So there was panic ensuing in the Dallas area. And so the store was packed with people purchasing emergency supplies and getting what they could. And so this woman went to the checkout line, and she met a employee named Sherry. She asked how her evening was going. She said, "Not well at all. I'm overworked, and I have to work all night through the storm, and why that's bad is because I have a broken out window, and I've got plastic over it, and I don't think it's going to hold up through this ice storm." So this woman just said, "Okay, well, I hope you have a good evening," and off she went. But nobody knew, except for this anonymous woman, that she was on a mission. She went across the parking lot where there was a bank. She talked to the bank manager and asked him to close down one of the drive-through lines so that this employee could park her vehicle and get some shelter from the storm. That happened, and so the woman went back into the convenience store, talked to the manager, and pleaded with her to give Sherry a break, just a short break, so that she could go park her vehicle. Sherry was dumbfounded. She didn't understand this random act of kindness. And as the woman was leaving the store, they're trying to, get her attention. "Why are you doing this?" She just said, "Just have a nice evening." She didn't want any fanfare. Many people underestimate their potential as problem solvers, and they really misjudge what they have at their disposal. Consequently, problems persist, and people don't receive the help that they need. But when you and others share what you have, even if it's just a little, many can receive what they don't have at all.
I really love a good problem. I know that's weird. He's weird, I'm weird, we're a great couple. When I was in junior high, I was a part of Extended Learning Program, ELP, or TAG is what they called it back then. And one of the major features of TAG is that we would do future problem solving. I think we were actually a very top secret government think tank, because they would provide us with these problems, and we would come up with 20 potential further problems that could come from this one problem, and then we'd come up with 20 potential solutions for this one problem. We would pick the best one, and then we would come up with a plan to execute it. See why I think we were a government think tank? We were dealing with things like oil spills and climate change and all of those things back in the 90s. So I think they were just tapping really young minds for information. But more than anything else I ever learned in school, that skill set has helped me as an adult. And so when a problem occurs, if I'm in a good place, in the right place, I think, ooh, this is an opportunity to be creative. And I love that story that you shared, because this woman didn't just hear the problem and go, "Oh, that's too bad, pity her," and walk out the door. She owned that problem and said, "What can I do to help? What's possible that I can do?"
It's the same question. What can I do about it? Thinking I can't. But really, if you think about what can I do about it, you can come up with a solution.
I just think it's funny in this particular season of my life that every time I come up against something that I don't know how to do, an obstacle, a hurdle, something that I look at and I go, "I don't know how to solve that. I don't know what to do with that." Then the next thing is, "God, I need your help, because I don't know what to do about this." And he has just brought some very creative solutions along the way. My next story is exactly that. These two young people have a problem. They each have a very significant problem, and they find that the help they need is in each other. Leroy Sutton had lost his legs in a train accident. D'Artagnan Crockett was legally declared blind due to a degenerative disease. These boys each needed a friend, as you can imagine, and somehow they found each other. They also found that what one lacked, the other had in enough abundance to make up for the first one. So their unique challenges that they both had forged a special bond between these two boys. Leroy and D'Artagnan could be spotted everywhere together, in the halls of their high school, on the wrestling mat with the rest of the team, after school at the local mall. They were unmissable because D'Artagnan carried his 170-pound friend, Leroy, everywhere they went on his back. See, D'Artagnan supplied the horsepower and Leroy the navigation system. D'Artagnan couldn't see to go, and Leroy couldn't go where he could see. And so the friendship proved symbiotic and mutually beneficial. Sometimes we approach something and we think, I have nothing to give because I have this weakness or this setback or this handicap in my life. And God says, but you have this in abundance. How can you help someone else? Both boys were champions on the wrestling mat too. They cheered each other on to victory, pushing each other to their limits and refusing to give up on one another. When graduation finally came, Leroy didn't have to ride D'Artagnan's back to receive his diploma. See, Leroy had just received his new prosthetic legs. He and D'Artagnan crossed the stage together, and Leroy said, "It meant so much to me to know that I have a friend there in case I stumbled." Leroy and D'Artagnan discovered the value of the word with. They realized that they accomplished more together than they did apart. We have the power to help others reach new heights by simply walking with them. Our focused presence is one of the greatest kindnesses that we can give. Back to you, Bob.
Don't ever call me that. Well, I was just debating because I got two more stories. Did you?
That's my story.
That's it? Okay, well, I'll end on this one. It's very helpful, and it kind of goes in some more with the power of with and something you shared earlier as well. So I'm going to do this one because oftentimes, you know, we have our own crises, but we see others in crisis, and we want to know how can we help. Mm-hmm. And we oftentimes don't say anything because we don't want to say something wrong. But, you know, these situations come and look like a family member, you know, suffering a heart attack, a friend who's arrested for DUI, a coworker's spouse files for divorce. You know, we know that there's got to be a right blend, a prescription, if you will, of hope and encouragement, and you need to be emotionally and spiritually prepared for those moments, okay? So that's the challenge, be prepared. There was a college basketball coach who said, when opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare. When the opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare. You need to prepare ahead of that opportunity. So the question is, are you preparing right now? Are you anticipating an opportunity that you might have even yet this afternoon to make a difference in someone's life? Like I said, most people want to help others cope with the crisis that they're going through, but they're afraid that you'll say something wrong or do something wrong, so they back away at a time when a kind and thoughtful friend could really accelerate the healing process. And that's a mistake. Your small and seemingly insignificant acts of kindness can help people overcome huge obstacles. Perhaps you already know the pain of sickness, broken relationships, job loss, eating disorders, or so on. If that's true, then you are uniquely equipped to help others through their crises. So here are just 5 quick principles that will help you show kindness to others when hardships come their way. And you can write these down. They'll be fast. Grieve with them. Grieve with them. It was the dialysis. I couldn't come up with what it was. She was with her friend.
Well, and I always think of Job's friends.
Yeah.
They just sat with him for 7 days and didn't say anything. We just need to be able to minister to people in their loss by being with them. You don't need to know what to say. You just need to be present.
Yep, the ministry of presence. And guys, I know that we are solution makers. We are problem solvers. And so when we're with somebody, our tendency is to try to fix the problem. We don't have to do that. We just have to come sit and be with them. Because you may not be able to remove the crisis or take away the pain, but you can share the burden. So don't be afraid to shed tears of your own. Remind them that grief is medicine and tears are therapeutic. Second, gather the right people. This is key. Gather the right people. A young single mother with 3 boys was asked what she learned after enduring 33 chemo treatments for breast cancer. She replied, "It taught me a new level of kindness, a kindness which allows others to show you kindness. Because I chose to receive their kindness, it built closer and new relationships." Having some time alone for meditation and reflection is healthy if you're the wounded one or the one going through a crisis. Maybe you feel like, I've got to do it on my own. That's okay for a little bit, but you don't have to bear that burden alone. Of course, go to Jesus. He can bear that burden with you, but use your friends as well. They want to help you. Because we get tempted to drift away from people altogether. Hibernation is not the answer. Rather, help your friends that are in crisis or are struggling, help them gather together with the right people. Number 3, encourage giving. Encourage giving. As family members and friends recover from crisis, encourage them to look for ways to help others. Wounds from a crisis may last a lifetime, but at some point the grieving needs to end and the giving needs to begin. In grieving, they will find healing. I think it's been said, I don't know how official, but the last stage of grief is when you can actually help somebody through their grief. So try to get through that last stage as well. Number 4, provide perspective. Provide perspective. You may have physical or emotional scars of your own, which serve as a reminder of what you've been through. But no life experience should be wasted because crisis teaches patience, empathy, and perseverance. So don't hesitate to pass on the experiences that you've learned to a family member or a friend who is searching for understanding. I'm going to switch. So then lastly, pray for them. Many have discovered the power of prayer and witnessed how it can bring healing, unity, and restoration. In times of difficulty, it's a reminder that God is on your side. Even if you aren't sure that he's listening, your prayers send a message that you care. And so we remember Ephesians 6:18, pray for your brothers and sisters, keep your eyes open, keep each other spirits up so that no one falls behind or drops out. We all need each other. Some more than others, and that's okay. And at different points, we need more people in our lives than others. You might tend to be more introverted or reclusive, and that's fine. But we are, again, part of the body, and that is so important. Last.
I'll just share this last little bit, and that is that last Sunday, right before service, I was running to Hy-Vee real quick to pick something up. And as I was hurrying back, there was this deer. You might have read this on Facebook, but this deer was crossing the road very, very slowly. And I wasn't going very fast, but I slowed down, and I noticed that the deer was taking longer than it should have taken to cross the road. And I realized on further review that this deer was hobbled. It had its front right paw pulled up, or hoof pulled up, and it had this kind of strangled gait as it was climbing up the curb and off into the woods, kind of by the Algona Railroad sign there. And so I paused, and the oncoming traffic paused, and the Lord just very clearly spoke to me in that moment and said, when you're already wounded, you're more likely to be injured again. And I just saw that deer and thought, how many people are walking around wounded? And not only will we wind up getting hit by traffic and getting further hurt, but wounded often attack because they're protecting that wound, as many of you know. And in that moment, and in this whole scheme of kindness and consideration of others, it just reminded me that everyone's walking around with a wound. And some are far more serious wounds than others. And we have to slow down and take our eyes off of ourselves and our own situation to assess the person in front of us and realize their wounding. And that there's great opportunity in that, to love that person, to encourage that person, to bind their wound if we can, and catapult them towards healing push them towards Christ, draw them towards Christ, carry them towards Christ, whatever we can do to help that person along in their injury and to get them whole again. It also reminded me that when we're wounded, that we're more likely to be injured again. And when we're going through those seasons of pain and those seasons of sorrow, that we have to remember that we're more easily agitated, we're more easily irritated and bruised than we would be normally. And so it just reminded me that kindness is so important in this world because it's such a painful place. And most people are hurting with something at any given point.
So before we close in prayer here in a second, we've printed off a front and back page of 105 ways that you can show kindness. So I just encourage you to just read through that. You'll be given those as you exit the building and in growth groups today. So read through those and see what one, maybe two things you could do. Just focus on one thing that you could do this week. There's lots of great ideas on that page. So God, we just bow before you. We come and ask that you would just bless our efforts, Lord, to show kindness this week as we've given in an offering, which sometimes is actually easier to do than to show kindness here in our own community, maybe in our own household, when we're tempted to have a quick comeback. Maybe showing kindness looks like biting our tongue. God, help us to show kindness to those that are especially closest to us. But may we show kindness as well to those strangers on the street. And we know that we can even be possibly entertaining angels, and we don't even know. But we know that we can do some good on this earth, Lord, not because of being driven or motivated by works, and that's what's going to save us, God, but because we have you in our lives. We want to show the love of Jesus to other people. We want to show kindness because you showed us kindness, Lord. So as we are living our lives here for the time that we have until you return, God, or until our own lives end, may we prove to be faithful stewards of what you've given us, and may we share our faith as we are continually growing our own faith. And just bless the week that we have ahead of us, Lord, in that effort, and bless the conversation we have in the next few moments in our growth groups. I pray that you would just anoint that time and solidify this idea into our hearts, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.